In this video, we will conclude part 1 of this series. In this part, we saw how the law of Moses came into being, what the law is, who the law was intended for, why the law was imperfect, and what the law was for. The law was a means that could lead to righteousness, but because of man's sinful nature, this did not happen. The law was intended to bring freedom, but ultimately became a prison from which people could not escape. In other words, the law of Moses produced slaves of the law. Let us briefly return to Exodus 19 and see what the future prospects for the Israelites were if they would obey God's law. Exodus 19 verse 5 says, "Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." If the Israelites were obedient to God, God would take them apart and regard them as his personal property. The people would be blessed and live in freedom in the promised land. God wanted to protect his people from the world, which was under the devil's rule. God wanted to save the people from the slavery where Egypt had placed them. Exodus 6 verse 6 says, "Say therefore to the people of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from slavery to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God." God rescued the people from slavery and led them to the promised land. If the people kept God's law, the people would be blessed forever and live forever free in a good land. God caused the people to go from slavery to freedom, so obedience to the law led to freedom and blessing. But man's sinful nature disrupted this and caused the law to become a yoke of slavery. The law that God gave was good, but man's nature was evil. Romans 7 verse 13 says, "Did that which is good then bring death to me? By no means. It was sin, producing death in me through what is good, in order that sin might be shown to be sin, and through the commandment might become sinful beyond measure." Because the Israelite could never keep the law of Moses, he ended up in slavery again. God had made the law so that the Israelite could escape from slavery in Egypt. But in fact, the Israelite ended up back in slavery. God intended the Israelite to live righteously and to be a blessing, but the Israelite's sinful nature caused the law to give him death and curse. The law of Moses therefore became a slave master from which no one could escape. The next Bible text in Galatians 5 verse 1 speaks about the law of Moses. "For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery." Paul called on the Galatians not to be burdened with a yoke of slavery again. A yoke was the block that was placed over the shoulders of animals, so that the animals could walk side by side. When Paul said that the law of Moses was a yoke, it means that the law of Moses is burdensome. In other words, life became a lot harder for no good reason. For this reason, the apostles called for this heavy yoke of the law not to be introduced for Christians. No Israelite could bear this yoke. Why should we unnecessarily burden believers with something that will not work anyway? The law was a yoke of slavery. In addition to the fact that the law placed unnecessary burdens on people, the law also caused people to be held captive. Galatians 3 verse 23 says, "Now before faith came, we were held captive under the law, imprisoned until the coming faith would be revealed." Imprisoned and unnecessarily burdened. These are two characteristics of the terrible slavery. The law of Moses became a yoke of slavery that led to death and curse on all people who tried to keep the law. Do you try to observe the law of Moses and to keep every law and commandment from your own strength? Then I hope that this part of this series has shown you that this is not the right path that leads to perfection. The law is good and its commandments are good, but the law cannot be fulfilled by your own strength and good works. You may do everything out of a good heart, but it is not the way of God. Only the righteousness of Jesus Christ and the guidance of the Holy Spirit can bring you to perfection and into heaven. The law of Moses, this is the old covenant, could not lead to perfection. A new covenant was needed to justify people. In part 3 of this series, we will discuss this new covenant. Now it is time to close the old covenant. How can we do that better than the following text in Hebrews 8 verse 13? In speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete. And what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. Part 1 of this series addressed the imperfections of the law. If God stuck with the law and did not make a new covenant, things would have ended disastrously for us. No one would be saved and everyone would end up in hell. The law was supposed to lead to life, but it became our death sentence. That is why God has made a new covenant and declared the first covenant obsolete. Not because God did not keep the first covenant, but because man did not keep the covenant. God needed another solution to save man. The law, it is good to read it. But keeping these commandments does not lead to justification and perfection. No one, except Jesus, gets into heaven by his own good works and by keeping the law. Everyone needs God's grace.